The story begins not with a scream, nor with blood, but with silence. A silence so vast, so endless, it stretches across the frozen ridges of Russia's northern Ural mountains. This was no ordinary wilderness. To the native Mansi people, the mountain slopes were sacred and feared. They called one of them Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead. It was here, in the winter of 1959, that 9 young hikers from the Soviet Union, strong, experienced, and filled with life, would set out on what should have been a triumphant expedition. Instead, it would become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern history, the Dyatlov Pass Incident.
If you were to picture the scene in your mind, it might look like this. A search party cresting a snowy ridge. The wind howls like a living thing, and snow lashes against their faces. Suddenly, one of them freezes, pointing down into the drifts. There, half buried in ice, lies a body. The body of a young man, barefoot, clad only in torn underwear, his limbs twisted in death. Soon, more bodies would be found, some with fractured skulls, some with broken ribs as if crushed by an invisible force, one missing her tongue, another with her eyes gone. The tent they had slept in was discovered slashed open from the inside. Their boots, coats, food, and supplies all left behind. No footprints of attackers, no signs of struggle, only the desperate trail of barefoot steps leading into the forest. What happened to these 9 hikers has never been fully explained. Theories abound: an avalanche, secret military testing, psychological breakdown, even extraterrestrial intervention. But the truth remains as frozen and buried as the snow of Dyatlov Pass. To understand the terror of what they've faced, we must go back to who they were, why they went, and how a routine expedition transformed into a nightmare.
They were young, they were skilled, and they were full of promise. At the center of the group was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Charismatic, disciplined, and admired by his peers, Igor was both the leader and the soul of the team. He was meticulous, the kind of man who built his own radio from spare parts, or who would carefully plot every step of a journey before setting out. Alongside him were 8 others. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, full of energy and warmth, beloved by her friends for her humor and optimism. Ludmila Dubinina, 20, strong-willed and principled, with a sharp intelligence and a determination that sometimes came across as stubbornness. Rustem Slobodin, 23, athletic and resilient, a skilled long-distance runner. Nikolai Thibault Brignole, 23, born to a French father and Russian mother, known for his charm and easygoing nature. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, who once fought off a bear with nothing but a geologist's hammer, fearless and almost reckless in his courage. Alexander Kolyavatov, 24, a nuclear physics student, quiet and thoughtful. And Semyon Zolyotarov, 38, the oldest of the group, a war veteran and survival instructor who joined at the last minute. And finally, Yuri Yudin, 21, who would begin the journey with them, but fate would pull him away before tragedy struck, leaving him the only survivor by chance. Together, they were no amateurs. They were experienced in winter tracks, skilled in skiing, navigation, and survival. Their goal was to achieve a Category 3 hiking certification, the highest level of difficulty, by crossing the Ural Mountains in the depths of winter. The date was January 23, 1959, when they boarded a train that would carry them toward destiny. To understand the terror of what they faced, we must go back to who they were, why they went, and how a routine expedition transformed into a nightmare.
The train clattered westward through Sverdlovsk, carrying them into deeper and deeper wilderness. The group laughed, sang songs, and scribbled in their journals. Cameras clicked, preserving moments of joy. Zina smiling in the snow, Igor adjusting his pack, Lyudmila striking a playful pose. They had no idea that these would be the last photographs taken of them alive. From the train, they traveled by bus, then by truck, pushing further north until they reached the small settlement of Vijay. This was the last outpost of civilization before the endless expanse of forest and mountain. Here, they bought bread, supplies, and left notes with locals. Their spirits were high, and though the temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Celsius, their laughter rang through the night. But not all would continue.
As the group pressed deeper into the mountains, one of them, Yuri Yudin, fell ill. Rheumatism, a chronic condition that flared in the cold, made it impossible for him to go on. With a heavy heart, he turned back. It was a cruel stroke of destiny. Had he continued, he would have died with them. Instead, he returned to civilization, unknowingly sparing his own life. Years later, Yuri would recall hugging his friends goodbye in the snow. He never saw them again. Now, 9 hikers remained, and ahead of them, the Mountain of the Dead.
By January 31st, they reached the edge of the highlands. The trees thinned. The wind sharpened. Snow fell in endless sheets, blinding and disorienting. The group began climbing toward their goal, but visibility was poor. On February 1st, they pitched their final camp. Their tent stood awkwardly on a slope of Kolatsiakl. It was an unusual choice, exposed, windswept, and treacherous. Perhaps Igor chose it deliberately, to practice under extreme conditions. Perhaps they were simply exhausted, unwilling to go further down into the trees. That night, as darkness fell, they cooked a modest dinner. They laughed, wrote in their diaries, and photographed each other in the orange glow of the stove. Then, as the wind howled outside, they went to sleep. It would be the last night.
The hikers' journals, recovered later from their abandoned tent, are the last living voices we have of that expedition. They reveal a group still in high spirits despite the harshness of the terrain. On January 31st, Lyudmila wrote of the cold seeping into her bones, but also of the camaraderie that warmed them. "We are gradually becoming friends with the stove. It's the only way to warm up." Another entry by Zenaida noted playfully, "The guys are teasing each other endlessly. The mood is lively, though frost is biting." Their words betray no sense of doom, no hint of the terror that awaited them. If anything, they read like youthful adventurers conquering a challenge. But by February 1st, the tone shifted. The weather worsened. Snowstorms swirled around them, erasing trails and landmarks. Visibility dropped to near zero. The group tried to push toward their target, Mount Otorten, a peak 10 kilometers away, but the storm forced them to veer off course. Instead of finding shelter in the forested valley below, they stopped on an open slope of Kolatsakh. Here, exposed to brutal winds, they erected their tent. Some suggest Igor Dyatlov chose the spot intentionally, perhaps to test their endurance,
perhaps to avoid losing altitude they had already gained. Whatever the reason, it would prove to be a fateful decision.
Photographs recovered from their cameras paint a haunting picture. The tent pitched precariously on the incline, the hikers bundled in thick coats, their cheeks red from windburn, a final image of them gathered, smiling, despite the storm. The tent itself was large, an improvised design, sewn from two smaller tents. Inside, they laid down skis to form a floor, then arranged their sleeping bags side by side. At the entrance, a stove had been set up for warmth. That night, they cooked dinner. Slabs of pork fat, slices of bread, and biscuits. They sang songs, told stories, and made notes in their diaries. For a few hours, their little canvas world was an island of laughter in a sea of howling darkness. Then, as midnight approached, they extinguished the stove and settled into their sleeping bags. Outside, the wind screamed across the slope like an endless dirge. Snow rattled against the canvas. What happened next remains one of history's greatest mysteries.
From here, the record goes dark. No more diary entries, no more photographs, only silence. It was not until weeks later, when families grew frantic at the hikers' failure to return, that the alarm was raised. At first, authorities hesitated. Delays were common in such expeditions, especially in winter. But by February 20, with still no word, a formal search was organized.
The rescue operation started modestly, a few volunteer students and local mountaineers. But as days passed with no sign of the group, the effort expanded. The Ural Polytechnic Institute dispatched staff, soldiers were brought in, planes were sent to scan the white wilderness from above. It was brutal work. Winds cut through clothing like knives, snow blinded the searchers, and the vast expanse of white seemed endless. The mountains offered no clues. Then, on February 26th, nearly a month after the hikers' last known camp, the search party made a discovery.
High on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, half buried in snow, stood the hiker's tent, or what was left of it. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, until rescuers noticed something chilling. The canvas had been slashed open from the inside. Inside the tent lay the hikers' belongings, untouched. Their boots, coats, axes, maps, even their diaries and food were all still there. Everything one would need to survive the Siberian winter, abandoned. The searchers were stunned. Why would 9 experienced hikers flee their shelter in the middle of the night, without shoes, without warm clothing, without supplies? Then they saw the footprints.
Leading away from the tent, faint depressions in the snow formed a trail. Bare feet, sock-covered feet, only a few in boots. The tracks stretched downhill, toward the edge of a forest nearly a mile away. The steps showed no sign of panic, no running, just walking, as if the hikers calmly left the safety of their tent into the freezing storm, with temperatures plunging to -30 degrees Celsius. The rescuers followed the prints, their hearts pounding. At the forest's edge, beneath a tall cedar tree, they made a horrifying discovery. At the base of the tree lay 2 young men, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Both were barefoot, clad only in underwear and shirts. Their hands were raw, their skin blackened by frostbite. Nearby, the branches of the cedar were broken high up, as though one or both of them had climbed desperately, perhaps searching for the tent, perhaps fleeing something unseen. The snow around them told its own silent story. Ashes, charred wood, the remains of a small fire. In their final moments,
They had tried to cling to life, huddled together for warmth beneath the towering tree. But what could drive them from the tent, half naked, to die in the snow?
The rescuers pressed on, combing the snowy slope between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent. Soon, they found 3 more hikers, Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their bodies lay in different positions, as though they had collapsed one by one while trying to return to the tent. Igor was found lying on his back, fists clenched, his face frozen in determination. Zinaida lay on her side, her body twisted as though crawling. Rustam had a fractured skull, though the injury alone could not explain his death. 5 hikers were now accounted for. 4 remained missing. The search intensified. Days turned to weeks. Snowstorms swept across the mountain, burying all traces. But in early May, more than 3 months after the hikers vanished, the final 4 bodies were discovered in a ravine deeper in the forest. And what the searchers found there would ignite decades of speculation, fear, and endless theories. The ravine. May 1959. The snow was beginning to melt in the Ural Mountains. Streams carved paths through the drifts, exposing what had been hidden for months. It was here, in a shadowed ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree, that the final 4 hikers were found. The scene was like something out of a nightmare. The bodies of Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Tiboblinole, and Semyon Solotaryov lay buried beneath 4 meters of snow, tangled together as if huddled in their last moments. But unlike the others, their deaths were not explained by cold alone.
The autopsies shocked investigators. Nikolai Thibault-Brignole had a massive skull fracture, so severe it was compared to a car crash. Semyon Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs, his chest crushed inward with immense force. Ludmila Dubinina had similar internal injuries, broken ribs, torn tissue, and something even more disturbing, her tongue was missing. Reports also noted her eyes were gone, as if cleanly removed. Alexander Kolevatov showed fewer external wounds, but his body had been strangely preserved compared to the others, raising more questions. What made these injuries so terrifying was not just their severity, but their impossibility. The internal trauma was immense, comparable to being struck by a car, yet the bodies showed no external bruisings or cuts, as if the force had been applied with surgical precision. Forensic experts were baffled. One investigator remarked, "The force required to cause such damage could not have been inflicted by another human being." The condition of their clothing deepened the mystery. Some of the 4 had been wearing garments taken from the bodies of their dead companions, suggesting that after the first group died of exposure, the survivors had tried desperately to stay alive by using their clothes. But there was more. Several pieces of clothing carried unusual traces of radiation. Though the levels were not lethally high, their presence was inexplicable. Theories swirled. Were the hikers caught in some kind of secret military test? Even the placement of the bodies raised questions. Why were they so far from the tent? Why had they not built a more substantial fire or attempted to construct a shelter in the snow? Why did they appear to be fleeing something that investigators could never find?
The official investigation, after months of examination, concluded vaguely that the hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force. No other explanation was offered. That phrase, unknown compelling force, has haunted researchers ever since. But the investigators did leave behind disturbing notes. The tent had been cut open from the inside, as though the hikers had slashed their way out in a frenzy. Some of the bodies showed signs of radioactivity. Others bore strange patterns of skin discoloration.
a deep orange-brown hue. And then there was the testimony of other hikers in the region who reported seeing strange orange orbs in the sky on the very night the Dyatlov group perished. The result was a storm of speculation, some scientific, some wild, all terrifying. The simplest theory was an avalanche. Perhaps a sudden shift of snow struck the tent, forcing the group to flee. The injuries on the final four could, in theory, be explained by tons of snow pressing down upon them, but problems arise. The slope was too shallow for a large avalanche. Investigators found no signs of one in the area. The tent, though collapsed, remained largely above the snow. If it was an avalanche, it was unlike any other.
Another theory pointed to the Soviet military. The 1950s were the height of the Cold War. The Ural Mountains were near regions where secret weapons tests were rumored to have taken place. Could the hikers have stumbled upon classified experiments? The radiation traces fueled this speculation. Some believed the group was caught in the blast wave of a missile test or exposed to chemical agents. The massive internal injuries without external wounds, could they have been caused by shock waves? But why was there no record of such a test? And why did the government close the investigation so abruptly, sealing files for decades? Then came the stranger theories. Some suggested the hikers had been attacked by the Mansi people, angered at trespassers, but no evidence of struggle or weapons was found, and the Mansi were known to be peaceful. Others claimed the group encountered a Yeti-like creature, pointing to one eerie photo recovered from a camera that seemed to show a large, dark figure in the snow. And then, the UFO theory. Witnesses in nearby villages reported glowing orbs in the night sky at the exact time the hikers died. Could they have been struck by something beyond human understanding?
The only man spared was Yuri Yudin, who had left the expedition early due to illness. His survival became a cruel twist of fate. For the rest of his life, he mourned his friends, often saying, "If I had been with them, perhaps I could have helped, but now I will never know why they died." He was haunted not just by survivor's guilt, but by the nagging knowledge that no one truly knew what happened on that frozen slope. In May 1959, the official inquiry closed. The cause of death? An unknown, compelling force which the hikers were unable to overcome. It was a phrase that explained nothing and deepened the mystery. Families were left without closure. Whispers spread through the Soviet Union that the truth was being buried, that secrets lay hidden beneath the snow of Dyatlov Pass. The files were sealed. For decades, the world knew only fragments of the truth, and in the silence, the legend grew.
What exactly happened on that mountain? Theories would multiply. Scientists, conspiracy theorists, and adventurers would all try to solve the puzzle, but none could provide an answer that explained everything. The torn tent, the barefoot flight, the broken bones, the missing tongue, the orange orbs in the sky. The Dyatlov Pass Incident became not just a tragedy, but one of the most enduring, unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. When the case was officially closed in May 1959, the Soviet government seemed eager to move on. The hikers' funerals were held quietly, with limited press coverage. Parents wept as coffins were lowered into the frozen ground. Some whispered about conspiracy. Others stared silently at the sky, still unable to comprehend how 9 strong, capable young people could vanish in such a bizarre and violent way. But despite the official silence, rumors spread.
Survivors from nearby expeditions spoke of glowing lights in the sky. Soldiers hinted at weapons testing. Locals avoided the area, whispering that the mountain was cursed. The pass itself, once nameless, was soon given a chilling new title, Dyatlov Pass, after the group's fallen leader. For years, the Soviet Union offered little more than silence. The official explanation, unknown compelling force, was repeated in hushed tones, but no new evidence surfaced. Researchers and journalists who pushed too hard found doors closed. Files remained locked away, gathering dust. But the families never stopped asking questions. And slowly, as the decades passed, more people began to investigate. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, previously sealed documents began to emerge. Photographs from the hikers' cameras, forensic reports, witness testimonies, all came to light. The mystery gripped a new generation. Scientists pored over the autopsy results. Geologists examined the slope. Engineers reconstructed the tent. Adventurers retraced the group's final steps. And with each discovery, new theories arose. In 2019, 60 years after the tragedy, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. Their conclusion? The hikers died in an avalanche. It seemed simple enough. Snow shifted, buried the tent, forcing the hikers to cut their way out and flee. Some succumbed to the cold. Others, caught in the slide, suffered devastating injuries. But many were unsatisfied. The slope was shallow. The tent was still visible. And if the avalanche had truly been so deadly, why had the group walked calmly down the hill, leaving organized tracks behind?
Another theory focused on the wind itself. Katabatic winds, sudden, violent gusts that sweep down mountainsides, could create a terrifying roar, disorient hikers, and even cause panic. Some scientists proposed that the howling winds, amplified by the tent's structure, triggered a phenomenon called infrasound, which can induce feelings of unease, dread, and irrational fear. Could the hikers have been driven into a frenzy, slashing their way out and fleeing into the storm, only to succumb to cold and injury? It explained some things, but not the crushing chest wounds, not the missing tongue, not the radiation. The Cold War was an age of shadows, and many believe the truth lies in those shadows. Some argue the hikers stumbled upon a secret Soviet weapons test, parachute mines, for example, which explode mid-air and produce shock waves strong enough to cause internal injuries without external damage. The orange orbs in the sky, possibly military flares. The radiation traces, evidence of experimental technology. If so, perhaps the government covered it up to protect secrets. Perhaps the hikers were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the evidence remains circumstantial, and the files remain incomplete.
Beyond the rational explanations lie the darker, stranger ones. The Mansi legend of the Mountain of the Dead. Tales of a Yeti or unknown predator stalking the group. Eyewitnesses describing lights in the sky, suggesting UFO activity. A photo from one of the cameras, blurry but haunting, showing what some believe to be a dark, human-like figure on the slopes. Skeptics dismiss these theories. But for those who look at the facts, the slashed tent, the missing tongue, the impossible injuries, sometimes the paranormal feels no less plausible than the official reports. For decades, the only surviving member, Eerie, carried the weight of unanswered questions.
He often visited his friends' graves, leaving flowers in silence. In interviews, he confessed that he never found peace. "I will always feel guilty for leaving. If I had been there, maybe things would have been different. But I was not. And now, we will never know the truth." Until his final death in 2013, Eerie remained haunted. In his final interviews, he admitted he still believed there was a cover-up, that the world had not been told everything.
Today, Dyatlov Pass remains a place of both pilgrimage and dread. Hikers still visit, retracing the doomed group's steps. A monument stands at the site, honoring the 9 lives lost. But the wind still howls there, just as it did in 1959. Snow still buries the slopes, erasing tracks and swallowing secrets. And visitors still speak of an oppressive silence, a feeling that something watches from the ridges above. The story has inspired books, films, documentaries, but none can fully explain what happened. None can capture the terror of that night. 9 young people, cut off from the world, fleeing into the frozen dark. Picture it now. 9 shadows in the snow, a tent, slashed open from within, bare feet pressing into drifts, vanishing into the night. A fire flickering beneath a cedar, dying as quickly as it was born. Bodies lying twisted on the ice, a tongue gone, eyes missing, ribs shattered. And above, the wind screams across the mountain, indifferent, eternal. To this day, more than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains unsolved. The official files close the case with a phrase as haunting as the mystery itself: death due to an unknown compelling force. A force that came from the sky, from the earth, from within their own minds, or something we cannot yet name. Perhaps we will never know. But on that night in February 1959, on the Mountain of the Dead, 9 young lives were lost to the snow. And the silence of Dyatlov Pass still whispers their story, carried on the wind like a ghost that will never rest.